This incident happened with my mother, father, and uncle, four-wheeling on the Como Road in Colorado. We had made it past Lake Como and to the end of the Jeep Road, where we fished for a while and ate our lunch. When we left the last lake, it was about 1:30 p.m., with my uncle and me in the lead on our four-wheelers. We had gone about a half mile when my uncle and I spotted something that looked like a dead, burned tree stump that was about 7 to 8 feet tall. We didn't think too much of it until it moved. It stood upright and walked like a man. At first we thought it was a hiker, but it was all the same color, from head to toe. It walked about 15 yards before it walked into the trees. My uncle and I both stopped to make sure we saw the same thing, but we drove down the road about 300 to 400 yards before we decided to go look for it. We walked into the trees about 200 yards and came to a small meadow. My uncle was looking the other way when at the other end of the meadow it ran through. I yelled, "There it goes!" and we took off after it on foot. This time I got a little bit better chance to look at it. The creature was a light to a medium brown and had shaggy long hair. It stood about 7 feet tall. When we reached the end of the meadow, each of us went into an opposite direction. My uncle went the same direction as the Bigfoot, and I went the other way, in case it double-backed on us. But we didn't see the creature after that. We did find a few footprints, but didn't have any plaster to make a mold, so we went back down the mountain. I know what I saw that day, and no one can tell us otherwise. Two friends and I went camping in the San Juan National Forest on 6/1/04. DC and I were from out of state, but JG was a regular camper there. We went 12 miles up the Forest Service Road and picked a campsite. We saw no one else that day, and it was a dead-end road. JG said it was the first time he'd been there alone. We spent the day hiking around and cooking meat over the campfire. We did not see or hear anything unusual that day, other than a partial horse skeleton. At about midnight, we were winding down when we heard 3 two-tone howls to the hill, approximately 1/4 a mile to our north. We knew it was not a coyote, but almost sounded like a person trying to imitate a coyote, because it had a deeper bass tone. About 5 minutes later, we heard the same thing again. Then I heard something like a gunshot in the same area, but there was no sonic crack. It was like something hit a tree, really hard. Both sounds came from the same place as the first set of howls did. We were all standing around the fire, wondering what it was. JG had a shotgun in hand, and we were all starting to get a little edgy. We are all police, former military, so it takes a lot to get any of us edgy. We all have camping experience, and none of us have ever experienced anything like this before. About 5 minutes later, directly to our west was a very loud two-tone howl, approximately 100 yards away. It howled again, and it was closer, so it was closing in on us. DC and I drew our pistols and flashlights, and all of us focused on the logging road, that if they would have to cross to get to us. There was a bright full moon, so the open areas were well illuminated. It howled one more two-tone howl before stopping at what we estimated to be 50 yards away, in the woodline. It seemed like it covered at least 50 yards, going through the woods while howling 3 times. Whatever it was big and loud. There was a lot more bass to the howls than a dog or coyote or a wolf. Each time it howled, it was a two-tone, in a series of 3, and it seemed unemotional or even intelligent. About a minute later, another series of 3 two-toned howls came from the hill to the south, approximately a quarter mile away. It seemed to be answering the one hiding in the tree line in front of us. Then the one in the tree line let out 3 more of the same howls. Let me stress again, this thing was loud. We were all pretty shaken. We felt that we had aroused at least 3 big things that were communicating amongst themselves and closing in on us. We were all facing out from a dying fire with weapons and flashlights drawn. We didn't know if we were being studied or they were getting in position for an attack. We decided to leave. After some debate, we decided to pack the trucks while one of us took turns watching with a flashlight and gun. A few moments later, we were packed and headed down the mountain to the main road. We did not see or hear anything while packing or leaving. When we got to the road, we stopped to unload our guns and stow them legally in the trucks. There was one house close to the road, and after a while, the dogs started to bark. I joked to JG that they were coming after us. Just then, we heard another set of howls about a mile back the road we had just come down. Whatever it was had followed us, and we left immediately. We were not sure what it was that night, but after talking about the incidents quite a bit, we think we had a Bigfoot encounter. It was a remote, wooded mountain location with a large lake over the hill. There were at least 3 intelligent beings communicating that sounded loud and very large. We had been leaving our scent all around and had been cooking meat all day. No person would be crazy enough to risk getting shot playing a prank on us. The howls were very eerie, to say the least. Like I said, they were all like the first 2 tones of a wolf howl, but much more bass. There was no trailing off like a dog, coyote, or wolf howl would do. Just 2 tones. Each 2-tone howl was in a series of 3 howls that took approximately 6 seconds per series. The only thing missing from the encounter was the lack of the famous Bigfoot stench. There was no wind, so maybe the thing in the tree line was far enough away for it not to reach us. We are not out to hoax anyone. We hope none of our colleagues find out, so our day-to-day judgment is not questioned or even ridiculed. It was Friday, January 25th, 2001. At first, I was not even going to go down to the area where I and a friend saw a Bigfoot. I was going to finish watching the U.S.A basketball team play and go home. But a boxing match was on the same night, and my best friend's, not the friend that saw it with me, brother-in-law was going to buy it on pay-per-view, and his brother-in-law lives in the area of Chromo and Edith in Colorado. There are always some crazy sightings of UFOs and Bigfoots, but I really didn't believe in these types of things until I saw one for myself. We watched the boxing match, and after it was over, we started to head back to Pagosa Springs on Chromo Road, and we were almost to Highway 84 when about 20 yards in front of us, this thing or Bigfoot crossed and went quickly, almost as if we were seeing things. I didn't know what to think, so I asked Sammy if he saw it, and he said, "What was that?" We didn't know what to think. We weren't sure. We got up to where it crossed, and I opened my door to look down on the road and saw a footprint, and Sammy opened his door and saw a track too. We both freaked out, and I drove as fast as I could. We didn't tell that many people, only the ones that would believe us. On December 20th, 2000, my wife and daughter were walking along a road when they spotted 2 large footprints in the snow, about 5 feet off the road, a quarter mile away from our cabin. Due to the size of the prints, at first they thought it was a bear, but as they got closer, they saw it was this huge footprint, and it was very similar to a man's without shoes on. They came home insisting I come and look at this thing. I examined the print by placing my foot next to it. My shoe size is 10.5, and this print was 5 inches longer and double the width. I estimated it was 14 inches long with toes, and a slight curve in the arch area. It was left a mystery until today's Denver Post arrived with an article on Bigfoot displaying the same footprint we examined on that day in December. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I may have seen a Bigfoot when I was in college in Boulder, Colorado, several years prior. This occurred in November of 1995. I was a freshman college student in Boulder, Colorado. And I used to like hiking in the Chautauqua Park nearby, which is higher than the rest of Boulder and faces the city. One night I was in Chautauqua Park at about 11 p.m. It was cold and I was standing in my coat, looking down at the city lights. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound and turned toward it. That's when I saw a large figure that was silhouetted against the city lights. It looked like a very large, hairy, naked person with a powerful build, broad shoulders, and a relatively small, pointed or bullet-shaped head. It spotted me, which made me afraid of being attacked, but instead it began running toward the cover of the trees. Its running gait was unlike that of any person I had seen. It was a kind of hunched-over, loping gait. Nevertheless, the figure moved quickly and disappeared behind a tree. That was all I saw of the figure. I have always considered this a possible Bigfoot sighting. This incident occurred after my husband, myself, and our 3 children and I had moved up to some land purchased on Sugarloaf Mountain, west of Boulder, Colorado. My husband managed a tavern at the time and had purchased the 5-acre silver mining claim for a song from At the Bar and on a paper napkin. I'm withholding the name of the song. We built a tiny 12 by 16 cabin and squeezed ourselves in there on the south side of the mountain, about 2/3 of the way along the original little mining road. The cabin was on only level land on a heavily treed and rocked parcel. The north side of the cabin snugged right up against the mountain slope, with pine trees all around. That side was 2 plywood sections high, which would have put it a hair over 16 foot. We had an oversized plywood platform bunk bed in the northeast corner of the cabin, which we adults and our baby daughter on the first level, and the 2 boys on the upper level. We put in a little window up there for them for air, and put in an inside shutter on it so they could close it when it got really cold, which it sometimes did. It reached 40 below the first winter we were there. I think it was during the second autumn there, so it would have been 1971. Our then 5.5-year-old son claimed he heard the sound of footsteps in the early evening after hearing a really strange sound. Definitely an animal, but he had no words at the time to even describe it or the age. He said it sounded like a call of some sort, and bigger than an owl. Some kind of hooting, I can guess. Then he heard some noises close by, rustlings or something. When he looked up through the open shutter window, he said he looked right into the face of a monster. All I know for sure is that I'll certainly never forget his terrified screams. When he calmed down, he described it as dark and very hairy, and a funny face and glowing eyes. It turned and ran away as soon as he started screaming. His brother, 2 years older, slept through the incident until his brother's shrieks woke us all up. With the ground sharply slanted up, we figured something would have had to have been just about 7 to 8 feet tall to peer into that upper window. Not being trained trackers, we found no evidence the next day. But our son, who is now almost 35, swears to this day that it was Bigfoot that he saw, and I have always believed him since there was no way in the world that, at his age, he could have made that a precise and auditory visual image of his terror. He came over and visited us this morning, told him about the article in the Post, and he reiterated his story. He says the image has never left him, and probably never will. I grew up in Boulder County. My parents quit farming in Northeast and moved to Longmont in 1960. During the summer, we would go up to Big Thompson Canyon or the St. Vrain to camp and picnic. In the summer of 1964, we were picnicking along the St. Vrain stream. We had started a campfire. You could do that then. And while I was looking for wood, I felt like I was being stared at. I looked up, and at the top of a sheer rock wall, about 30 feet up, I saw him. I could see him like yesterday. He was looking at me, and as soon as I saw him, he turned and left. He was very large, probably 8 feet tall, and had long graying hair. His face was darker and did almost look human. No one believed me, of course, but I can still see his eyes looking at me before he turned, so I have always believed in their existence. I was driving south, down from the mountain. On my regular route, I had my high beams on because it's dark in that area. It's very rural when all of a sudden, a large upright dark figure stepped out into the road. I stopped and watched it cross the road in 3 steps. This thing was so tall that it stood at least 1.5 feet above the rack on the roof of my Jeep Grand Cherokee. The legs were long, and it bent at the knee like a human. All I seen was the side profile of it. It was very tall, and from what I could see, the head was large and long. The shoulder span was very wide too. The side profile of the face was flat. It very quickly, in 3 steps, crossed the road. It's a wide 2-lane road. After it crossed, I drove forward a little and tried to see where it went, but I couldn't see it anymore. This thing was frightening. I have been looking for it every time I'm on my route, but had not seen it again. On my other route, which is on a county road, 306, about a 10-minute drive from this incident, 2 days later, there was a very strange, strong smell in the area, around 3 a.m. The smell was a very strong, sweet, burning rubber smell. I can't describe it. I never smelled anything like it before. I smelled this for 2 days straight in this area, and then it was gone. This incident occurred in Chaffee County, Colorado, in an area known as Middle Fork, about 14 to 17 miles west of Salida, off of Highway 50. My friend had an elk tag for that area, but I did not draw, so I was just along for the ride. My friend took a stroll up a very high ridge as I stayed in the bottom, walking along the creek that split the saddle. As I made my way down the creek, I noticed a strange single track in a patch of snow. The track was old as the snow was melting away its clarity, but it strongly resembled that of a human print. It was extremely large, 16 inches long, 7 inches wide. I must have studied the track for an hour, trying to make it out, but it was so very unclear. I did not see another track in the immediate area, but I decided to show it to my friend anyway, even though I started believing that it was just an act of nature. My friend was intrigued by the track, as he found more characteristics in the print than I did. He pointed out the toes, which were very hard to see, but when you looked hard, they were there. They seemed to go straight across the top of the foot, in a straight line, but only 3 were visible. We then chatted about the track for a while, and making excuses for what else it could be. We then decided to head back down. We walked down the creek a little farther when we saw something we could not believe. About 100 yards from the original track were about 6 or 7 additional tracks in snow and mud. These tracks were in much better condition. They had the same dimensions of the first track and appeared to be just as old. They were in a shaded area, so they were somewhat preserved. Like the first track, they only showed 3 toes, but one track showed 4, and one showed 5. The only explanation I had for the tracks being so far apart was whatever made the tracks must have used the rocks along the creek to walk on. I was camping with my family at the headwaters of Clear Creek Reservoir near Granite, Colorado. I was very young at the time. I was with 8 of my cousins, and we decided to climb the hill at the north end of the reservoir to get a better view of the area. There were 9 of us, ranging in age from 9 to 14 years old. When we reached the top of the hill, we started rolling rocks down the hill. It was then that we noticed, right across the ravine from where we stood, a tremendous amount of crashing through the aspens. At first, we thought it was a grizzly bear, since it stood on its hind legs, watching us from a distance of about 300 feet. Its hair was golden brown in color, and very long. It was very tall. I'd say at least 8 feet. It just stood there on 2 legs, looking straight at us. I could not see its face. The sun was at its back, and its face was in silhouette. but I could tell that the face was very dark. The head and body were large and were not built like a bear. We stood and watched this animal, and it watched us for several minutes. It stood on two legs, and at all times it seemed to rock back and forth. At the time, I assumed that this was because it wanted to get our scent, or maybe get a better view. We then decided to run for it. We came down the hill at breakneck speed, and were scolded by our parents, who thought we could have broken a leg running so fast down the hill. My parents claimed it was a bear, but I've been hunting and fishing these mountains for 30 years. I have never seen a grizzly bear in this part of the state. I have seen grizzly bears before, and their fur is brown. The color of the fur on this animal was unlike anything I have ever seen. Again, it was very long and golden in color. To this day, me and my cousins swear we saw a Bigfoot. A friend and I and my dog were hiking in the Loveland Pass of Colorado. We parked on Highway 6 where it crosses the Continental Divide and hiked south along the divide for about 5 miles. We meandered down into one of the valleys carved into the divide on the eastern side. We were looking for pioneer artifacts from the many who passed through this area on the trek to California. We had descended below the tree line where the valley peters out into a boggy meadow. This meadow runs down to a stream to the immediate east. The stream is large at this point, and I think this is the same stream that can be seen from Interstate 70 at the Eisenhower Tunnel several miles north at the Loveland Ski Resort. Dense brush and tree cover run along the opposite bank. We began to hear what we thought were noises from a large animal across the stream. We tried approaching the source of the noise, but as we moved closer, the sound moved away downstream along the opposite bank. I started catching glimpses of a large, hairy brown and black animal and thought we were following a bear. My friend had the same idea, and our pace slowed to a halt. The animal then moved a little closer to us and appeared to watch us for several seconds. Its height made it look like a bear reared up on its hind legs. It then turned and moved off downstream through the brush in a long, loping, two-legged gait that would have been impossible for a bear. We did not care to follow, adding to my belief that what we saw was not a bear or other wild animal is the fact that my dog did not bark or show any of the aggressive excitement he usually displays upon encountering a wild animal. He actually drove an adult black bear, which was pillaging garbage cans, out of a campground several years ago. During our encounter in Loveland, he only showed the polite interest he shows in people in the woods. In early June of this year, I was riding my four-wheeler above Jasper, Colorado, at about 7 in the morning. I had stopped to rest at the logging block when I heard a loud howling noise. There was no wind that day, and I could not focus in on the source. I had seen a lot of sheep on Cornwall Mountain, all the way up, so I figured it was a dog or the sheep herder. When I had finished my water, I was loading everything back on the bike, when I heard the same sound again, only this time it was much louder. I zeroed in on it, and my heart stopped. Slightly below my logging road, and to my right, I observed a very large, dirty black man-like creature with its hands around an aspen tree. It was leaning a little to the right, staring at me. I stood very still and never took my eyes off of it. After about 7 or 8 minutes, it turned and simply walked off down the hill. I will add that I am a 30-year archery hunter and have successfully tagged bears in the same unit. This was no bear. It was large and very shaggy looking. Let me begin this with a brief bit of information about the area. The South San Juan Wilderness in the San Juan Mountains of southwestern Colorado is considered to be Colorado's wildest corner. It was in the backcountry of this wilderness in the fall of either 1977 or 1979, I forget which, that a Sioux grizzly bear was startled and attacked a bow hunter. He was mauled but managed to kill the bear with an arrow he repeatedly drove into the bear's chest. It was thought that the grizzly had long been extirpated from all of Colorado. If there are grizzlies still in Colorado, this is where they are thought to be. I have been hiking, backpacking, camping, and fly fishing in this area for about 6 years now, making about 2 to 3 trips per spring, summer, fall, and one of those trips usually includes a backpack into the backcountry. I am very familiar with the sounds and the various animals that make in this forest and mountains of the West and of this specific area. On this last trip, I managed to sneak away for a 3-day weekend in mid-June with the new lab. I heard that salmon fly hatch had started and wanted to try and get a piece of the action, fly fishing for big, aggressive trout. I figured I would save myself a few dollars by not camping in the developed Forest Service campsites and enjoy some solitude at the same time. So I camped in large series of meadows known as the Trail Creek Primitive Camping Area. No water, no services, just camp where you will. I was about 15 miles from the tiny community of Platoro at the upper end of the Conejes Valley, and maybe 10 to 15 miles from the next nearest community of assorted vacation houses, known as the Rocky Mountain Estates back down the valley. I did not realize it at the time, but this was a remote area, even though the dirt road that ran up and down the valley was only about a half a mile across the meadows from my camping spot. Behind me, by about 50 yards, was the edge of a 150-foot moderate canyon of the upper section of the Pinnacles run of the river. On the other side of the canyon, which is steep but easily crossed by humans, is a huge expansive mountainside of aspen groves, spruce and fir trees, and mountain meadows. This is the beginning edge of the South San Juan Wilderness area. The second evening I had cooked dinner and taken the lab out for the last evening walk around the meadows. It had been a good day of fishing, and we were both tired. We went to bed in the tent just at dark. It was a night of an almost full moon, and we both fell asleep quickly. A bit later, I awoke and thought I had heard something outside the tent, probably a deer. But because I was curious, I sat awake for a bit and listened. After about 10 minutes from out of nowhere, I heard this unreal, loud, clear, resonant scream, screech, howl, roar type sound from not too far away. It sounded maybe 400 yards away, and like it might have been just across the canyon on the mountainside. It was like no sound I have ever heard in my life. It was fairly high-pitched and did not have the rough, gravelly sound that cats have when they roar and call. It was clear, crisp, loud, and lasted for 6 seconds. It seemed to be 2 parts screaming howl and 1 part roar, as it had that deep quality, but it was still high-pitched. I sat there for a minute, stunned, and then realized what it must be. I have read accounts on several websites before of the sounds these creatures supposedly make, and this was what my mind came to. So I guess chance does favor that prepared my mind. It was not that far away. The sound seemed to be coming directly toward me, like it might have been screaming at or towards me or this meadow area where people sometimes camp. It felt territorial, aggressive, even a little threatening. Even though I had a .357 loaded, with hot, hollow points and a strong flashlight, the prospect of encountering some big, hairy man-thing outside my tent in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere and alone, was a little more than I wanted to deal with. I got the dog in the truck and got the hell out of there, with a .357 in my lap. After a few minutes on the way back down the valley, toward an area where I could sleep in peace, I sort of had delayed reactions. I became unnerved and thought if I actually see one of these things in the headlights or on the side of the road next to my truck as I passed it, I might really lose it. I was that rattled. I have lived and backpacked extensively in Montana and in the Canadian Rockies and dealt with the reality of grizzly bears with no real problem, but this noise and the creature that most likely made it really freaked me out. After sleeping in the car in the nearest little town of Antonio, I could not find any lodging at 11:30 at night. I went back a little after daybreak to look around and to get ready for another day of fishing. I ate a cautious breakfast and kept looking around. worried I might actually see one of these things. But in the daylight, I was not quite as unnerved. I did not find any tracks in the greater area in which I was camping. It was just mostly grass, although I did walk around and search for a bit. When I got home, I went online and listened to recordings of mountain lions and bobcats. Although I know these sounds and have actually seen a mountain lion up close in the wild, the sound was definitely not one of these. But when I went to this website and listened to some of the recordings, I realized it had to be one of these creatures. The sound was a bit higher in pitch than some of the other recordings, but very similar to most other respects. Now, I am paranoid and worried that I might not be doing any more backpacking in this beautiful and remote area for fear of running into one of these spooky creatures, especially at night.